Okay, Wally, it's all yours.
Okay, good morning, good Erev Shabbos, everybody. As you all know well, Jewish law, halacha, encompasses every aspect of one's life, one's behavior, ritual behavior between man and one's fellow man, and also there are a lot of monetary aspects of halacha. The Shulchan Aruch is divided into 4 sections. You have Orach Chaim, which deals with the holidays and the rituals and all the blessings, the normal things that we do. You have Even HaEzer, which deals with wedding and ketubot and the divorce and things of that sort. You have Choshen Mishpat, which deals with all types of damages and monetary issues. And you have Yoredeya, which deals with kashrus and shechita and so forth. Most people spend their time studying areas related to Orach Chaim, ritual law. What do we do if you leave out this part of davening? What if you're late for davening? What is a mistake in the Sefer Torah? How about Hilchos Shabbos? All these Orach Chaim is what most people study because it relates to what most people do. The other 3 halakim of Yoredeya, Choshen Mishpat, Even HaEzer, are usually relegated to experts. And even experts have limited knowledge of these areas. For example, I would say 90% of rabbis, most people who receive smicha on things that may not necessarily be related to what they do. I am never going to be a mashgiach in a slaughterhouse. I am never going to examine a cow's entrails. Yet I had to learn the halachos of shechita, bedika, and all these types of things in order to get smicha. I'm never going to write a get. I'm never going to be involved in intricate areas of Eruvin necessarily. And that's why these areas are relegated to specialists. One of the areas that is generally ignored, unfortunately, is the area of Choshen Mishpat. I mean, we need to have kosher meat. We need to have weddings performed and divorces. We need to have people who know these halachas. And if you want to become a dayan, if you want to become a member of a Beit Din, then you have to have an additional smicha on those areas of Shulchan Aruch which are not part of the normal curriculum for rabbis. Choshen Mishpat deals with all types of monetary issues, and it is not generally studied in a halacha l'maaseh manner in most yeshivos. They'll study Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, but they won't necessarily get into the halachos as they apply to us today. One of the areas that I want to focus on today is the will that most people have. People decide how they want to have their assets allocated after they die. And many people may not be aware that there is a halachic way to do that, because the way most wills, last wills and testaments, are written are contrary to halacha. And if you're interested in observing halacha, then you have to write a halachic will, and you have to be in touch either with an attorney who knows the halacha and has a form for that, or you have to be in touch with a rabbi who can guide you. My task this morning is to familiarize you with what the requirements are for a halachic will, perhaps tell you where you could find one. My job is not necessarily to defend the halachic system, which many might feel is antiquated in terms of how they allocate assets to an heir, but to describe what the process is. And that's what I'm trying to do today. So the halachic will, if firstly, everybody should have a will. If they have any assets distributed to their children after 120 years, then they should have a halachic way to allocate that will. If you have a regular will, you have to have a halachic will added to it, or as part of it. There are some attorneys that will do this for you, and some even have the format. I'm not drumming up any particular business for anybody, but if you're interested, Dasi Bradstatter is one of those attorneys that does that. Okay. According to the Torah, when a man dies, the inheritance goes to his sons, period. That's the halacha. If there are no sons, then the inheritance goes to the daughters. If there are no sons or daughters, then the inheritance goes upstream to the person's father. If there's no father, it would go to the brothers. If there are no brothers, it would go to the sisters. If there were no brothers or sisters, then you go back up to the previous generation, to the father's father, or to uncles, or to aunts. And this continues on until the heirs upstream are all located. In each case, if that particular heir's father died and left children, the children would inherit either sons, or if there are no sons, then the daughters as above. But again, it goes primarily to the sons. If there are multiple heirs, they split the inheritance, except in the case of sons who inherit from their father, in which case the Bechor, a firstborn eldest son, receives a double portion. So if you have two sons, the older son gets each time, he gets a double portion. If there are two sons, for example, and a person dies, the estate is split three ways. The eldest son gets two portions, while the younger son gets one portion. If there are multiple heirs, and one of their heirs died and left children, then the children split equally the parents' single portion. And there are legal descriptions for all this. But this is, again, a lot of it might be very, very technical, but this is what the halacha requires. Now, by the way, I'm giving you what the halacha is, but there are forms available that make this much more simplified, which I'll let you know in a moment.
Well, Wally.
Yes.
So where does the wife fit in? I didn't hear anything like that.
You didn't, correct. I will come back to that. The wife is technically not an heir, but we'll see. Halachically. Daughters normally do not inherit unless there were no sons, but they can receive an allowance or even a dowry from the estate. Husbands can inherit their wives' estates, whether it's Daraisa, Drabanan, is Machlok Rishonim. Wives do not inherit their husbands. Widows can receive a payment based on her ksuba, which obligates the husband or husband's estate to pay a certain amount. That's why you have in the standard ksuba, you have a certain amount of silver, me'es kukim kesef, and they add extra kesef to it. In the Middle Ages, by the way, they used to add many, many, many more times what the standard ksuba requires, so that the woman will be protected in the case of her husband's death, knowing that she wouldn't inherit her husband. So if a guy was very, very wealthy, he would promise his wife in his ksuba, he would add Tosos ksuba, and she would get that money, but she wouldn't necessarily get the money directly from the estate. You're relying on the goodwill of the son to take care of his mother, but from the estate, she wouldn't get from the estate, she'd get from the ksuba, and that obligates the husband's estate to pay a certain sum upon death or divorce.
Wally,
Yes.
does the husband inherit from the wife?
Yes. We'll come to that. Again, there's a lot of very, very technical details. If somebody wants his wife to inherit, or if a couple desires that after they pass away, both their sons and their daughters should inherit equally, or that the firstborn son should not get double portion, you're allowed to make certain conditions, but inheritance does not fit in. You can't change the inheritance laws that dramatically unless you do it in a halakhically sanctioned way. You can devise a will halakhically that bequeaths your assets in a way that is contrary to what the Torah had in mind. But if it's not done properly, like most secular wills that are drawn up by attorneys are not in accordance with the Torah. So the question then remains, is there a way to distribute one's assets in a way that is different from Torah law? Is there a sanctioned way? We know, for example, that there's something called Savoa Shchivmara, the deathbed, I guess, what would you call that? Deathbed allocation of a resource. On his deathbed, he says, I want to give so much to this person, and so forth. But that only refers to the reapportionment, halachically, or what he's already giving out to his heirs. And that only applies, again, on a deathbed. However, you can give gifts during your lifetime to individuals who would not otherwise be technically considered heirs. But then again, once the gifts are given, you no longer, the grantor no longer has assets, as access to these assets. There's a lot of technical. I don't want to get into the nitty gritty, but this is all about nitty gritty. Unfortunately, you have a lot of interesting halakha, kosher, mishpat questions here that are argued and debated. There is a very creative response to this, developed by the Ramah, called Shtar Chatzi Zochar, and by this mechanism, you could somehow circumvent some of the biblical laws, which are in contemporary culture perhaps not synchronous with how people want to give out their money. People want to give money the way they want to give money, not necessarily the way the Torah tells you to give money, which is an issue by itself. Nevertheless, there are ways to do that. You have a document where the testator, the parent, the father, can obligate himself during his lifetime to give a huge monetary gift in a quantifiable sum, perhaps bigger than what he actually owns, to a daughter or daughters, which shall take effect a minute before his death. That's called a shtar chatzi zochar, and he can pledge his assets as security for this debt. In other words, I can say that I pledge to give $10 million to my oldest daughter, and I pledge whatever assets I own to guarantee that, and it takes effect a minute before my death. All right, and I also stipulate that my son.
Wait a minute. How do you know when you're going to die?
I was going to say, yeah.
You
How do
don't.
you know when you're going to die?
You don't.
You could be lying on your death and live another 10 years.
That's correct. So first of all, they're not getting the money now, but I will give them that money a minute before I die. Whenever that, again, I'm just laying out what the technical devices are. There are certain issues with it, but basically, you have the right.
There also are the issues with giving something out. And before this whole idea of doing it beforehand, I think I said in the Gemaras.
Yeah, but essentially, a will is allocating your assets before you die, who you want to get. So I can do it after I die, or I can say you can have all this a minute before I die. But by saying it a minute before you die, it allows you to allocate them in a way that you think is perhaps more equitable than what the Torah requires you to do. Otherwise, it has to go to your oldest son, and he gets double portion. You have the right to obligate yourself to pay a vast sum that is greater what you actually owe, or the foreseeable sale value, even without getting anything. That's a technicality. It's a technicality. All right, which allows you to create a document that might nullify or go around some of the halachic requirements for a legal for legal inheritance, for legal Yerusha. Yes.
Okay, technically, anything that the wife owns belongs to the husband.
Yes.
So even if you bequeath a large sum of money a minute before you die, technically it goes back to you before you died. So that doesn't really work.
No, but it does work because what I'm doing is, let's say my entire estate is worth $1 million. So I am saying I want my wife to have $10 million, and I am pledging my entire estate as a security for that $10 million. And it takes effect a minute before I die. So in a minute before I die, she gets that document, and it's not worth $10 million. It's only worth $1 million. But legally, she can collect that. This is how they set up what they call a halachic will. Halachic will, it doesn't require a trigger mechanism. Basically, she gets that gift of $10 million if there were $10 million, but not, she gets whatever is left. But this, again, I'm not going into all the details because that would require much more time. There's one caveat. Again, it's the whole separate discussion, which we don't have time to get into now, is to, under what circumstances can you create a vehicle to violate Torah law? That's a whole separate parsha in terms of halacha and hashkafa and so forth, as to whether it's appropriate to do this. The only reason we're doing it is because it offends modern sensibilities. Again, you have to go back in history. The purpose of the way the Yerusha law was set up was in a society where people had to be protected. If a woman had no resources, then how would she survive? However, the theory was her son would take care of her. She wouldn't need to have a Yerusha. But in modern society, that doesn't always work out. So the fact that modern society didn't keep up with the halakhic framework or the halakhic goals of what Torah values should be, we know that in modern families, things don't always work out 100%. And there are breakups between parents and children. So in order to protect the wives, to protect the daughters if there are no sons, who may not be married yet, and have their own protection of their own husbands, the Torah has devised vehicles to sort of circumvent the strict halakhic mandates of the laws of inheritance. How appropriate that is, you can throw in all kinds of terms of ethical behavior, or what should be. How can you say the Torah is not ethical? We get a lot of philosophical debates here that would have us going all day long. But basically, you can designate different things. For example, I can designate my library. All my svarim should go to my children. That means my oldest son would get a double portion of the svarim. I mean, there are many, many parameters, and it goes in many, many different directions. Money can be allocated the same way. It does require some skill in drafting this document, in terms that the wives shouldn't be cut out and that daughters shouldn't be cut out. Again, this is modern sensibilities of who should inherit, which don't always coincide with the halakhic ideal of how families should inherit. We don't want to steer assets away from their rightful heirs, but the halakha does endorse or allow bequeathing money in a halakhically sanctioned way, whether it's for charity, whether it's for children, daughters, etc. If there are no sons. There's a lot of technicalities here, and this is why Choshen Mishpat is generally reserved for those who are really, really experts in that area of law. There are some very, very good articles if you want to read up on this in much more detail. I have a whole bibliography here. You have a Chaim Jacker in his book Gray Matter, in volume 3, has an excellent article on it. Rabbi Willig has an article about it. Chicago Rabbinical Council, Rabbi Herschel Schechter. They've all written articles on how to write a contemporary will in accordance with halakha. And again, if you go to a frum attorney, who's an expert in trust and wills, they can draft this for you.
So Wally,
Yes.
so in the absence of this halachic will, again, getting back to the wife. So I think what you were saying is that the son has to make sure that the wife, that his mother is being taken care of financially. Does he have to use the same guidelines in terms of the budget that his father used? Is he now bound by those same parameters?
Not necessarily dollar for dollar, but the expectation is within a halachic framework that the son will take care of his mother and his sisters.
Right, but in other words, if the father was very generous and he really let the mother, his wife, spend whatever she wanted, now is the son somewhat, could say, oh, well, I'm a cheapskate. I'm only going to give her 50% on the dollar now, and she has to survive on that.
Well, this is why you have to fill out a halachic will in order to, because again, not every son and mother have the perfect relationship. Not every son and his sibling sisters have that kind of relationship. The halacha is making certain assumptions, and those assumptions do not always represent reality. So if everybody who has a will, everybody should have a will. I suggest you go online to the Beth Din of America. The Beth Din of America online, you can download a halachic will. And they give you the format to use, and you can add it on as an addendum to your regular will. Have it notarized and so forth. Or you can go to an attorney who's knowledgeable in these areas, and they can append that to your regular will. But if you go to the Beth Din of America, BETHDIN of America, and download their halachic will, it's a simple document. You don't have to understand all the details. All you have to do is sign it and append it to your regular will, and then you are in accordance with the halacha. Because these are very technical details. And ultimately, what the halacha, going back to the question I raised before, can you devise something to circumvent the halacha? And what we're doing in this case is not really circumventing the halacha, but we are trying to guarantee the halacha's goal, purpose. The purpose is the equitable treatment of the heirs that a father leaves behind, his wife, his children. What if those children are not very nice to each other or to their mother? Well, that didn't enter the halakhic mind's framework. They assumed that all parents and children had a wonderful relationship, which is always true, which is why the Ramah and others, Rishonim and Achronim, developed the Shtar Chatzi Zachar, technical term, for this particular document, which not necessarily circumvents the halacha, but really promotes what the halacha wanted to do, and that is that heirs are taken care of properly within a halakhic framework. So this allows you to do that. It's a simple format. You don't have to become an expert in Choshen Mishpat to do it. Download it in the Beth Din of America and have it appended to your will. It's a simple document and therefore guarantees that everybody is taken care of in an equitable and a halakhic framework. This is just one area that for some reason, I don't know why, well, I do know why, but Choshen Mishpat, monetary laws and laws of relationships in business and in tzedakah and so forth, somehow this is not given the same attention as we are due to Shabbos and Kashrus, mikveh. For some reason, the Choshen Mishpat, they tell a joke. It's a sad joke that a nice Jewish boy graduates Harvard Business School, and his parents give him a gift, and it's a big, thick book of Jewish business ethics. And he opens it up, and all the pages are blank. It's not a joke, because unfortunately, every so often you see in the papers a picture of an otherwise Orthodox-looking gentleman who is accused of this crime or that crime, usually of a financial nature. Choshen Mishpat is part of the Torah.
Rabbi?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have a question. You keep saying that the main purpose of the halakhic will is so that the distribution of the inheritance is equitable or whatever. Even in the most halachic oriented families, the relationship between the father and his children is not necessarily equal in terms of what he wants to leave. Like if perhaps he has some children who are married and some, for whatever reason, have not succeeded in being married, and they might never be married. So they're alone, and maybe their profession doesn't financially provide them so much for the future as perhaps a more successful child. So when you're saying equitable, do you mamish mean like equal across the board or not?
Yeah, it allows you to distribute the funds in a way that you see more fit than what the halacha would demand of you.
Oh,
So the bechor gets double no matter what. He could be not a nice person. He could be a very rich and successful, doesn't need the money, where another sibling might. Halacha is he gets double portion. This sort of makes the distribution more in your control. Let's put it that way, so that you could be. But again, download the documents, take a look at it, add it onto your will. It's a simple thing to do, and it also gives you more control over how you want your assets distributed. And I think that is in keeping with what the halacha really intends. Now, again, I can't speak on behalf of the halacha, but this became available because early, I would say, by the 16th century already, people were realizing that the ideal family structure, where everybody is in love with each other and everybody treats their children equally, and that doesn't always work out. In an ideal world, maybe, but in reality, it doesn't always happen, and therefore people were being left destitute, and women had to fend for themselves. It's interesting. Earlier in the Middle Ages, in the time of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbi Gershom, they held women in such great esteem, in addition to the fact that they knew that she might be frozen out of the estate. So they added tremendous amounts of money into the ksuba. That was their way of doing it, because that's a contract. She can collect from the husband's estate whatever is in that ksuba upon his death. So that's how they guaranteed protection for women. They built it into the ksuba. Today, most people have no idea what the ksuba even says. If you follow the simple reading of it, she's promised 200 pieces of silver, and as an act of great generosity, he ends on an extra 100 pieces of silver. So how much are 300 pieces of silver worth today? Not enough to live on. Now, if you want, you certainly could add $1 million to that ksuba in silver if you wanted to. You could, and then you wouldn't need a shtar chatzi zocher. But I've never, ever, ever, in my memory, been to a wedding where that was done. If you look at the ksubas from time of Rashi and Rabbeinu Gershom, yes, they did that, because they knew, even then, that sometimes people weren't always equitable in distributing their estates, and some people got frozen out. So the shtar chatzi zocher that we use now is a way, I would say, not of avoiding the halacha, but of fulfilling what the halacha's original intent was. The original intent was the bechor would take the place of the father and take care of his family, mother, sisters, so forth, unmarried siblings, what have you. It doesn't always work out. And that's why we have this vehicle, which, as I said, it's available online, the Beth Din of America. Very, very important document to append to your will. Everybody should have a will, and added on to that will should be a halachic will to make sure that your wishes are fulfilled in accordance with the halakha. Because, they say that, once you're dead, you don't do mitzvahs anymore. But at least the things that you value in life, should be allocated according to the mitzvos. And that's the whole purpose of the halachic will. Okay, that's all I wanted to share with you this morning. The details, again, are very, very technical, not important, but they've all been ironed out by people much greater than me, and they put together in a document. And as I said, there are many attorneys. Dasi Bradstatter is one local attorney that does this. There are others, I'm sure, in Teaneck and elsewhere that can add it on, or if you don't know one, download the document and just ask your attorney to append it to your will. There's a halakhic will, and there's another document I'll be talking about next week, I think, on Wednesday, and that would be the medical advance directive, which is also something everybody should have, and we'll talk about why that's important on Wednesday. Anyway, any questions? Halakhic will.
Yeah, in Israel, if there's no will, then the law stipulates that the wife gets half and the other kids all share the other half.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah, because when my father was nifta, my brothers and I had to sign a document for the government to allow my mother to stay in the apartment.
Oh,
If
gosh.
we wouldn't have signed it, she would have been forced to sell it and move and give us half of what she got.
Oi.
Yeah,
Well, that's why these documents are very important to avoid situations.
exactly.